I think this is going to be quick. I think it's going to be more informational / instructional than it will be about exploring the topic and figuring things out. So in some ways it's just reaffirming things. But speaking of boundaries, I don't remember when. I thought it was just a couple weeks ago. Maybe it was a couple months ago. I thought I talked about this already, but I looked and I guess not. I might have mentioned it in a vlog based off of some counseling stuff that I've been talking about with my counselor. But I looked for conversations and I didn't have anything with boundaries that I saw. I searched keywords and then I looked just the past few months and I didn't see anything. So if I already talked about it, my bad, but I don't think it's there. So, and again, maybe it's because I didn't feel the need to explore the topic more or less, and that's why I didn't talk about it. But because it has become more relevant right now, and I think it's a thing that should always be relevant, that people should always be thinking about their own boundaries and how to enforce them, and the consequences of that and whatever else. I think that's the thing just with human relationships that we need to be thinking about more often. So it should always be relevant, but it's much more relevant right now. So I would like to think of boundaries as rules. That seems really harsh, but I'm going to compare it to sports. So in sports, you have rules. Let's say it's basketball. You can't body check someone in basketball. You can do that in another sport like hockey or effectively like football. Would you be able to have that kind of contact? In basketball, you cannot do that. There's a certain amount of physical contact allowed, and that is not a part of that game. So there's a rule, and based off of that rule for that sport, there's a certain amount of just like safety measures or whatever. That's just not the way that game was played. They have made that rule, and if you disobey that rule, or even let's just say fighting, right? I mean, like you can fight in hockey. You can do that, and then there's kind of someone there to obviously referee the situation and say when that fighting is done. And the rule is like, okay, when they say it's done, right? If they allow it to happen, then I guess they allow it to happen. And when they say it's over, it's over. So those rules are there for a lot of different reasons. Just there's certain parts and aspects of games that don't allow for certain things, and if that rule is disobeyed, then there's usually consequences to that. So in basketball, you would maybe get a foul if you push somebody, or if you were to body check them, or do something like that, right? If it's unnecessary roughness, I mean that's typically like an American football term, I think, but you can get physical with basketball, but there's certain lines you can't cross without breaking that rule. So, pushing and things like that are one of those things you can't really do. So if you break that rule, you would get maybe a foul. If you do it again, maybe you get another foul. If you do it again, you're allowed so many fouls, right? If we're thinking about the NBA, I think we're four or five before you're ejected from the game. And it's just like, okay, you aren't listening to the rules, you aren't caring, you're not paying attention, you're not focused, you're not whatever it is, you can't adhere to these rules. You have shown us that 5 times, and now you have to leave. That is the consequence for that. Think about soccer, right? With fouls, you can get they'll throw like a yellow flag. If it's bad enough, though, you could just get red flag, you're out, just gone right away. It depends on how deliberate that breakage of rules is. Same thing with any other sport. It depends on what you do. Like you can't go and stab somebody. That's not a part of the sport. Like you're ejected and there's legal ramifications and like it's over. You know what I mean? There's certain types of deliberateness that you can't cross that line. Or even if you're cheating. Let's say it's not a physical thing and not about physical safety, but if it's cheating, then it's just like, okay, the game has to end or whatever, and there's an ejection, there's someone leaves or the whole team forfeits or whatever. So, I mean, in basketball, too, there's things called technical fouls that aren't physically related. They're like berating the ref or other coaches or players or whatever. There's a certain line, again, with even what you can do talking-wise, and that you may be ejected from the game. It might be a technical foul and you're gone. If it's bad enough, or maybe, in some cases, the whole team suffers. So, with that comparison, again, there's some things that someone could do deliberately. Again, we're talking about social contracts, or we're talking about relationships, personal relationships with people, where there could be a very deliberate, very mean-spirited or selfish or whatever occurrence, and maybe it's bad enough that that's just, okay, so for example, I talked about cheating in sports. What about cheating on a partner, right? If you have designed your relationship with a certain amount of parameters and rules and guidelines that say we are a monogamous, long-term relationship, we don't seek emotional or physical attention outside of this relationship in a romantic way from other people, if that's, I think most people are familiar with this concept, that if some person were to engage in that behavior with someone else, that might just be it, depending on how far they took that behavior, right? If they were talking to someone and it got a little flirty, maybe there would be just, you'd call that a foul, right? Like maybe you would have a conversation. You'd say, why is this even happening? We need to fix our relationship. Like why, whatever. But if someone went and then had sex with somebody else and you're like, what the heck? Like, absolutely not. I don't tolerate that. That's it. Relationship's done. You're ejected from the game. Like, that's it. It could be that you're not allowed to play that sport anymore. You're banned from this. You know what I mean? Like, it's over. So there's obviously a range of things there, and that's just with one topic like cheating, but it could be a lot of different things. So I think that it gets tricky depending on the relationship when you get into like family and when you get into, I don't know, I think that's probably where it gets tricky. Family by blood, put it that way. Because a lot of people think like, oh, family, like they can never do wrong, or that you always forgive your family, or whatever it is, and I think that's garbage, because they're human too, just like anybody else, and they are capable of horrible, horrible things, right? It's like, just because someone's family doesn't mean that sexual abuse is okay, right? Just because that person's family doesn't mean physical abuse is okay, or emotional abuse, or whatever it is. That doesn't make it like, oh yeah, well you should forgive them more because they're family, because they're blood related, versus like you wouldn't forgive someone as quickly if they weren't. That doesn't matter. People are people, family or not. They can be horrible, toxic people in your life, and you shouldn't tolerate that. And you need your own set of guidelines and rules, right? So calling those boundaries, that you have boundaries of certain things that you like or dislike in social situations or with certain types of relationships, friendships, romantic relationships, familial relationships, sibling, parental, whatever, that you have a certain set of boundaries. I mean, those could be work relationships too, right? Like employer and employee relationships or staff relationships. So you have boundaries, and those are important to know what your boundaries are, so that you don't hopefully get into a situation where you keep moving the goalpost. Because I've been there, where I'm like, I think this is my boundary, and then it's like they push beyond that a little bit, and you start to make excuses or rationalize their behavior, and you keep moving the goalpost, and then you end up in a really horrible situation. You're like, how did I get here? And it was just inch by inch by inch by inch, and the next thing you're 5 football fields farther than you ever would have thought you would go with what you will tolerate in someone's behavior towards you. So that's why it's important to think about boundaries and know what yours are, and know what rationalizations or whatever are even appropriate, or what you believe, what you will be willing to be flexible with. So, like I said, family relationships get tricky because people believe that you should forgive family more so than anyone else, and I just don't believe that. Basically, I guess, to cap things off, is that you should have boundaries. You should know what they are. You should think about those and evaluate those and reevaluate those just as regular practice. And if people are pushing those boundaries, I mean, there's a certain amount of communication that needs to happen. And unfortunately, what happens, and I think this applies to family more than other things sometimes, but I'm sure it applies to friendships and romantic relationships and other things too, is that somebody may not be super deliberate in their not wanting. They're maybe not super deliberate in their crossing of your boundaries. Again, you need to communicate your boundaries depending on how deliberate that act or extreme that act was. Maybe it's an immediate ejection. Maybe it is a foul, and you communicate to them, hey, I don't want that to happen again. this is where I stand, these are the rules of engagement, these are like whatever, right? This is how we communicate and how we have an existing relationship that's healthy for both of us. I need this from you, or I need you to not do this. And you move on. And then if that happens again, maybe it's 4 fouls, maybe it's 5, maybe it's only 3, whatever. But at a certain point, you just may not be able to trust that individual anymore. And that's unfortunate, even if that person thinks like, oh, well, I thought I was doing the right thing. It's like, okay, but I told you that's not the right thing. I told you what my boundary is. I told you what I need. And you are going over that because you think you know better. But that's not what I said. I said, this is what I need. And you've done the opposite of that thing. And you knew that. You didn't forget. You acknowledged you're doing the opposite of that thing. So why is this a debate? You've continually crossed this boundary, despite the fact that you may be doing it for reasons you think are positive or good. But I've set a boundary. I've set that, and I'm allowed to do that. And we've agreed on that boundary, and you've understood it, and you've said, okay, I get it. Yet you continue to do it. So then there comes a point where you would need to do something about that. And if you cannot continue to trust that person with whatever that is, then maybe at that point there is an ejection. There is an ejection from the game. We can't apparently communicate, or we can't have an existing relationship because you have crossed that boundary an excessive amount or in an extreme way or whatever it is. And therefore, the game is done, and that's it. We don't have a relationship anymore, or our relationship has changed. Maybe it's like, okay, maybe we just don't hang out in person and we just talk on the phone, or maybe it's like, we used to talk all the time, but apparently I can't. If you are, whatever the topic of conversation is that maybe you set a boundary on not wanting to discuss that, and they keep going and they keep pushing or whatever. Maybe it's okay. We talk once a month. Then we talk if a family member dies or whatever, right? Like you have to set a new boundary or parameter or whatever, but you can't, there's a certain point where you have to evaluate how many times has that boundary been crossed, what are you going to do about it, because you as the individual have control of that relationship, because you can exit the relationship, and you can say, this person has crossed this boundary, I don't feel safe in this, I can't trust that this person isn't going to cross that. And that's very different than challenging someone, because like my relationships that thrive are ones where people challenge me, ones that I trust that person to challenge me. I know that they're looking out for my best interest. They're not crossing my boundary. They're being honest with me about a thing that I've told them I want honesty about, which for most people is everything. Like I want to be challenged so that I can be a better person. We have challenging conversations. It's very different when you set a boundary saying like, hey, I'm not ready to have this discussion. I don't want to talk about this thing, or like, I don't want you to do this thing, or just like, I don't know, don't show up at my house unannounced. There's an example. Don't do it. I don't like it. It doesn't matter if we're friends. Don't do that thing. It causes me anxiety. I can't, whatever. Like, call me, let me know, hey, I got some unexpected free time and I'm in the neighborhood. Do you think I could drop by? And then you can say yes or no and whatever. But don't just show up unannounced, right? For some people, that's just not freaking cool. For other people, it might be, whatever. It's fine. Again, individual boundaries. Individuals have certain parameters and things. We are all people with our unique personal histories and chemical makeup and experiences that add to our conditioning, our nurture, and our nature. And because we're all individuals that way, we have things that are just very specific to us that may hurt us or help us, and those boundaries need to be respected.